So, hello. Nice to see you today. Just to start our conversation, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself. And then actually I can do the same, who we are and what we are doing here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today and for the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Beth Tyson, and I'm a childhood trauma consultant. I worked with children who had trauma in the foster, kinship, and adoptive space for several years, and really got an understanding of how trauma impacts a child's development, their brain, their nervous system, their body, and how to help them cope with that and move forward after adversity and very difficult life challenges. And then I turned after having my daughter, took that knowledge and really wanted to reach a wider audience by providing education and webinars and training like this in a way
Mhm.
to larger populations, because I just felt like I had all this information that was only accessible by people who could get to therapy, and so many people across the world cannot. So I've been sharing some of my knowledge and information to help families, help children heal from trauma and adversity.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know that you're author, so you have books.
Yes, yes. I am the author of a children's book called A Grand Family for Sullivan, and it's about a little koala bear who was suddenly removed from his biological family to live with his grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the challenges and struggles that they go through. And it's a therapeutic story for kids who are suddenly not living with their biological parents anymore for any number of unfortunate circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And so this book helps them understand their situation and gives them some coping skills and some ways to understand it and work through it that really settles down their nervous system.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. So my name is Helen, and I am CEO software engineering agency, and our expertise lay in custom software development for educational industry. So our mission is to improve all the processes in educational institutions to make them more effective and help our kids to get, better, quicker education, and we would like to have like better future for our kids. And one of the reasons why actually we're talking today about such a sensitive topic of war child trauma. From 2014 in Ukraine is going war, and from 2022 we have full-scale war. And I would say that for adults, this is not easy situation to handle, to live. And I hardly can imagine how kids can cope with like all the situation, because even if you are living in like relatively safe environment in Ukraine right now, we don't have like totally safe environment at all. So even if you are living in West Ukraine, you can experience from time to time some explosions, and you can feel the sirens and different kind of stuff. And it's harder to where kids are living in not so far from the front line. And this is the reason. So right now kids are living in Ukraine, many of them, in these circumstances. And I would appreciate your advices and your suggestions how we can help our kids, and what actually we should do. And just to proceed with this topic, can you please give us more understanding about what kind of symptoms we're talking about?
Sure. Well, I always start with a basic definition of trauma, and everybody will have maybe a little bit different definition. It's kind of like the word love, everybody interprets it differently. But trauma is anything that overwhelms a child or adult's nervous system to the point where it impacts their ability to function in everyday life. And this trauma can sort of become trapped in our nervous system and in our brains and bodies, making it difficult for us to trust that the world is safe around us, to trust that the people around us are safe. And when you have um, a, a break in your foundational trust as a child, it can impact you throughout your lifetime.
Mm.
And so that's why it's really important to try to prevent and also heal trauma when it happens to anybody, but especially in childhood when the brain is developing and making up beliefs about the world and
Mm.
beliefs about ourselves. And then those beliefs stay with us. And so if we feel as though, we can't be safe in our bodies or in the world around us, then that can impact our ability to function across the lifespan. So some symptoms that you might see in children are varied, and every child will react differently. And again, this information today is not a replacement for mental health care or professional mental health
Mhm. Mhm.
education. I just want to give some tips and advice, but if you are in distress, then you should seek out professional counseling. This is
Okay.
for educational purposes. I just like to, say that.
Mhm.
But some symptoms you might see in children are avoidance. So, avoiding loud sounds, perhaps being afraid of loud sounds, being easily startled by any noise that is outside of the ordinary. So if a child is used to hearing sirens or used to hearing explosions of any kind, and then they hear something similar to that, it could activate a trauma response in them where they might run, where they might get aggressive and start fighting, or they might freeze and
Mm.
just kind of shut down and freeze and almost like not be able to do anything. Like they just go into kind of a frozen state.
Mhm.
They may dissociate, which means that they're physically present here in the moment, but in their minds, they're somewhere else. And so you might find that children, your brain does this as a protective
Mhm.
measure. It's a way to protect you from the realities that are around you. And so a child who is unable to remember things that are taking place, if they lose track of time, if they suddenly don't remember being present in something that they were there, and they may deny it and say, I wasn't there, or no, that I didn't hear you say that.
Mhm.
And then they might get in trouble
Mhm.
for, lying or, not doing what they were asked to do. And the truth is that sometimes they are dissociating, which means that they are not mentally present in the moment. They're not hearing you. They're not remembering what happened. And so, we can end up getting really angry and frustrated with kids who say, I don't remember that, or you never said that, or you never
Right.
asked me to do this thing. So it's important to have a framework for that, to understand, like, if you're seeing that frequently with your child who's saying they don't remember things,
Mhm.
they could be in a state of such anxiety and fear that they are at times dissociating um, from the reality that they're living in.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and of course, we would never want to punish a child for
Sure.
having that type of trauma response. But when we can get curious and think about these things in a different way, you might see nightmares. You might see a regression in behavior. So a child that maybe had gotten past the potty training phase and was no longer needing to use diapers might regress and need
Mhm.
to wear
Mhm.
diapers again. You might see them being irritable, crying more frequently, being very clingy with you, wanting to be
Mhm.
around you, close to you all the
Mhm.
time,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
having difficulty separating from you. So there's a lot complaints of bodily, physical symptoms. So headaches, stomach aches,
Mhm.
diarrhea,
Mhm.
constipation.
Mhm.
Anything with the digestive system tends to be affected by trauma.
Mhm.
So those are just some of the, but also, that aggression, it can look like the child is very angry. But that can be a secondary emotion to fear. So if they
Mhm.
might actually be very fearful, but being fearful is vulnerable, right?
Mhm.
If you're admitting that you're fearful, then that's a vulnerable place to be in. But if you're angry,
Mhm.
you feel stronger. Children feel stronger when they're angry. We
I
all
see.
do.
Yeah.
Um, and so anger and irritability and like short-temperedness could be covering up the fear that's
Mhm.
underneath.
Mhm.
So those are
Mhm. Mhm. And how adults can behave to help kids to cope with all these symptoms. So it depends
Yeah.
on the age of the kid, and for sure, it's it's related. It is related with some personal strengths and weaknesses of the kids. But how to deal with this?
Yeah. So it does, the symptoms look different, for every age group. The little ones are going to be crying more clingy,
Mm-hmm.
more irritable. Then we have school age kids who might be really internalizing their symptoms. So like with the stomach aches and the bodily pain and things like that, and the trouble sleeping, and the nightmares. And then you might have teenagers who are shutting down, won't talk to you,
Mm-hmm.
are just like on devices all the time, or playing video games, or doing things to distract them. They might get into trouble. They might turn to drugs and alcohol to
Mm-hmm.
cope with their anxiety, which is also very common, at least here in the United States. I can't speak to what it's like in the Ukraine, but there's a lot of substance abuse here that's tied to trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And because the symptoms are so uncomfortable in our bodies, you become desperate to
Mm-hmm.
get those feelings to go away. And so if you don't have proper help from a parent or a guardian or a mental health professional, you might not know what to do, and you turn to drugs and
Mm-hmm.
alcohol because it takes all the uncomfortable bodily symptoms away.
Yeah, so they're
Um,
trying to release as soon as possible these uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It
and
can it can be very, very difficult to cope with. And
Mhm.
I know from my own experience, I don't only speak about this, and I'm not only educated in it, but I've been through my own trauma throughout life. And although it wasn't war or anything even close to that, I can't, imagine what that could be like. I have experienced intense anxiety and trauma responses, and panic attacks at times.
Mhm.
That's another symptom you might see, is a panic attack,
Mhm.
which to children can feel like they can't breathe, that they might feel as though they're dying, which isn't true.
Mhm.
It's just you might have very panicky feelings, your heart beating really fast. The child might have chest pain. They might feel dizzy, like they're going to pass out. They might feel very shaky. Their bodies will shake and tremble. And because they don't understand what's happening, they think they're either going to die or that they're going crazy. And that's a very common experience to high levels of anxiety. And
Mhm. Mhm.
so I think the most important thing that you can do for children is normalize these experiences. And first of all, as an adult, being aware of the symptoms. So, watching this and hearing
Mhm.
this information and knowing what to look for, and understanding that your child isn't just acting out, or isn't just being troublesome on purpose, but that these are actually responses to the trauma that they're enduring every day of their lives.
Mhm.
And once you have that trauma lens, and you're able to see their behavior not as them being, like quote unquote bad kids, or, difficult kids, but
Mhm.
like, oh, wait, this is from the trauma, then you can start to do things to help them cope with the trauma they're experiencing. So one of those ways is to normalize their experiences.
Mhm.
So letting them know that under the intense circumstances that they're in, of course, they are going to be scared. Of
Mhm.
course, they are going to be irritable, crying. It is totally natural and normal to have panic attacks for this level of stress. That there's nothing innately wrong with them, but
Mhm.
that they are coping with very overwhelming situations. And this is how our body protects ourselves. It
Mhm.
feels a threat from the world outside, and these reactions and responses that our body is having are ways it protects itself. And so it's a natural response. Um,
Is
that
it
being said, it can get, go
sorry?
ahead.
And Mike,
I was just going to say that being said, you do need help to learn how to manage it. And you
Right.
do, if it's interrupting, the child's ability to eat, sleep, maintain relationships, and, do daily tasks, take care of themselves, for them to take
Mhm.
care of their personal hygiene. If it's unable for them to, if they're unable to interact with peers and do the sort of everyday tasks of life,
Mhm.
that's when you really need professional help if it's
Mhm.
available. And I don't
Mhm.
know what that
Mhm.
might look like in the
Mhm.
Ukraine.
Mhm.
Um,
So it's available not in all area for sure, but we have like online services, and this is the good question that our psychotherapists they can help adults and kids as well. Um, Whether it's okay to show for adults that we are scared as well in some situations to kids, because kids they are relying on us, and when you show that you are scared, so not all the parents they're ready to show that we are afraid and we don't know what to do and whether we just need to hide, or run or whatever.
yeah. Yep. It's a delicate balance. I find that it's important to not ever put any of the never make the child feel like they are responsible for what's happening or that they need to be in control. So we do need to maintain our sense of like, listen, I got this. We're going to, do the best we can to keep you safe. Where the
Hmm.
adults are in charge of keeping you safe, and it's not your responsibility. There are lots of people that are trying to help us. There are helpers in the world, and really pointing out who those people are, the different organizations that are trying to help. But at the same time, I think it's emotionally healthy to express to a child that, yeah, mommy's scared too, or
Hmm.
dad's scared too.
Hmm.
Um, you can do it in a way where you're still showing strength, like the way I just said it, like, I'm scared too.
Hmm.
Um, but we're going to get through this.
Hmm.
We're going to get through this, and we have a plan. And I
Hmm.
think the most helpful thing to children to help sort of lower their anxiety is to know that the adults have a plan in place, if possible, like some sort of family plan that you can all come
Hmm.
up with together is ideal if the child is old enough,
Hmm.
where they can be part of that process so that it gives them some control and autonomy. But
Hmm.
saying like, okay, if the worst case scenario happens, let's have a plan of what we're going to do next so
Hmm.
that we can keep ourselves safe.
And we
And I know
articulate
that,
this
yeah,
plan with the kid just to let understanding that so everything under
yeah,
control. It's okay to feel fear, but we will do the next.
right. We'll
Mhm.
make the next best decision that we can, given what takes place. And, um, it's our job to keep you safe, and we're always going to keep you safe, to
Mhm.
the best that we can. Um, I would say that the younger children might not need to know about the plan, like 5 and under might not need to know the plan, but if the child is, you think you kind of have to discern, how much your child can handle and what their
Mhm.
levels of how fearful they are. Some children might become more fearful if they know you have a plan. So it's like
Mhm.
you have to sense out like, will my child having a plan feel more confident with that information, or do you think it will break down their sense of safety? And you can kind of know, the kids that always want to know what's happening next,
Right.
the ones that are always like, where are we going? What are we doing? And they're very hyper vigilant. That's another sort of trauma response, where they're always kind of on the alert for danger. If you have a kid like that, then having a plan will likely be very helpful because they're already thinking about it, right? They're already projecting out into the future about this might happen, that might happen. So knowing what the next steps would be will be very calming to them,
Mhm.
most
Mhm.
likely. Um, and again, you have to kind of discern like what's best for
Right.
your
Right.
child.
Because we know our kids, better than like someone else.
Right. Like I have no idea what is best for your family.
Mhm.
I can speak on a wide,
Right.
I can generalize across, a
Mhm.
topic, but I want everyone who's listening to know that you are the expert on your family,
Mhm.
and you have an intuition and a knowledge and a knowing about what's best for you.
Mhm.
So take this guidance and see where it fits and where it doesn't, and kind of make your own way with it. But yeah, I mean, it's without knowing people individually, it's hard to give
Yeah, yeah,
specific, like,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
should do
yeah.
XYZ. Yeah.
Agree, agree. So let me return for a second for the symptoms of traumas. Uh, are there any like hidden symptoms that we cannot observe, but we can see after, some period of time? What
Yes.
it can be?
So it's very common for there to be a delayed reaction in the trauma.
Mhm,
So once the child becomes safe, so say there's a period of survival mode, where they're just trying to survive, your brain kind of kicks into full action and is tough and is strong to get through that survival mode and then through that time of extreme duress. And then a couple months later, even up to 3, even sometimes up to 6 months later, once the child has been able to sort of settle a bit or feel a little bit safer, they might then begin to have the trauma responses and the trauma reactions to
mhm,
what happened a month ago, a year ago, and it could even be longer. So it's always important to have that trauma lens. Once a child has experienced something like war or violence, you want to keep those trauma lenses on for like the rest of their life, really,
mhm,
and
mhm,
look at their behaviors through this understanding of my child has now endured this trauma and this happened to them, and it changes the brain and the belief systems they have about the world around them. So you might see them being very distrustful of others and feeling just anxious in general about anything that has to do with their safety. They may develop phobias of different things that might remind them. And the thing is, they could be triggered or activated at any time into a
mhm,
past memory. So another thing that happens with children, if they witness or experienced a lot of loud explosions and sirens and bombs and things like that, so 5 years from now, let's say, if the war is over and you have a 10-year-old, and at the time, the child was 5, um, if that 10-year-old suddenly hears a large truck go by outside and like a steel drum falls off that truck and hits the ground and makes a really loud,
mhm,
jarring noise, you may see that child, duck, run, hide,
mhm,
just
mhm,
maybe
mhm,
just kind of. So that would be like running, right? That would be one of the trauma responses, which is to flee, to run away. You might see that child freeze and not be able to like move, not be able to think, not be able to make any decisions. That would be the freeze response of trauma.
mhm,
You
mhm,
might see that child start to fight and get really angry and screaming at his teacher, or screaming at his mother. They may refuse to do things, become disobedient. They may break things. That would be the fight trauma response.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
there's these three trauma responses that we'll see when a trigger or an activation takes place, like a loud noise. Even when the child is safe now, let's
mhm,
say, hopefully we can hope for that. um, Even though the child is safe, they're being reminded of a time that they weren't safe, and their brain really believes that they're back in that unsafe place again. It's
mhm,
kind of like a short circuit when they hear
mhm,
a sound, anything to do with the 5 senses. So sights, sounds, touches, tastes, smells, anything that any one of those sensory experiences can activate a trauma response if it's similar to something they experienced in the past that was traumatic.
mhm, mhm. I see. I
Um,
see.
yeah.
And uh, if we talk about the future, so what kind of problem kids may experience when they will grow, when they are adults? What we should prepare ourselves, because all of us, including kids, we are already injured by this war. So what we should experience in the future? What we should expect?
Yeah. So big question, and it's hard to say specifically how everybody reacts, right? Because trauma is subjective, which means the easiest way to explain it is like you might experience the same exact situation, and I might experience that same exact situation too, and you might really feel traumatized by it and overwhelmed and unable to handle like the stress of it, which would be totally normal. And I might have a little bit different makeup in my body. I might have more of a support system around me. I might have had a more stable childhood or something different that happened along the way. Maybe I don't have a history of previous trauma yet, different things that could make me more able to handle it. And I'm just using this hypothetically. I just, and so what's traumatic to one child might not be traumatic to the next. So that's, something to keep in mind. Now, something like war seems to me like it would be traumatic for just about everybody involved. I can't imagine somebody that wouldn't be. But everybody reacts to it a little bit differently. And so you're going to see with children, or you might see with children, behavioral difficulties, difficulty following directions, difficulty being like, you might see like oppositional behavior is the word I'm looking for, where they don't want to do what they're told. They're kind of pushing back on everything. That might come out of a need for control. So when war happens, especially the people that had to flee the country, they lost control of everything. And so when humans need some sense of control in order to feel safe, and when all of your control is stripped from you, you'll do anything to get it back so that you can feel safe again. And so you might notice children who really want to control things, and they do that by, pushing boundaries and not following directions and being difficult to kind of follow the rules and things like that. And that's because it's giving them a sense of control. What we can do to help them with that is give them healthy things that they can control. So, finding ways to give them options about things instead of just saying, you need to do this now. It's like, find 2 options as a parent that you're okay with. So let's say, it's, the child won't get dressed in the morning for some reason, refusing to get dressed, and you're saying, put on your clothes now, and they're like, no, and you need to get out of the house and do something, and they won't, and it's well, you might find that it's easier if you ahead of time choose 2 things for them to wear and say, which one would you like to wear, and give them a choice of the 2 things that you're okay with them wearing, so that they feel as though they've kind of made the choice on their own, and it's giving them a sense of control and power. Now that's just one small way. There's lots of ways that we can give kids options. I caution from don't give too many options. I would never give more than 2 or 3 options, because then it just gets overwhelming and just get paralyzed trying to make a decision. But
sorry for interruptions. It's the same that you open wardrobe and propose, so whatever you would like to choose today.
Right. So giving choices instead of just saying you must do this now, even if it's simple things like getting in the car. Let's say it's time to go. We have to get in the car. Do you want to walk to the car? Do you want to run? Things similar, silly things like that. Those little instances, those moments to kids who have lost so much control over their lives can feel really positive to their nervous system, can give them the sense that they are in control of something in the world, can help them feel safe. So it's important in any big decisions and any things where you can give a child choice, try to give them some options. That's not always possible, but where you can and where it's safe, that is one way to help them. Other ways, of course, is spending more time together, the attachment between you and your child. And part of the way that we prevent the severe impact of trauma is by having a really strong attachment relationship in early childhood. So I know, if we want to talk about prevention, it's really that early childhood relationship that prevents children from having very serious, reactions to trauma. So the closer they feel with their caregivers, and the more loved and unconditional support and care that they have, and the more time they spend together, what we see is that those children handle life's adversities better. They don't have such terrible long-term outcomes. Now, given the situation, what you might see long term, and what we know from research that's been done in our country, we have something called the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And this is something you can look up online, but it measured multiple different adversities in early life for children. And then it's a longitudinal study that followed those children into adulthood and to see, what were the correlations there. And
Mhm.
again, this is not a direct it's not like, okay, if this happened to you, then then you're definitely going to have mental health issues, or you're definitely going to become addicted to substances or anything like that. It's not like a one-to-one correlation, but it just gives us a general idea that children who experience trauma tend to, or have a higher risk for substance misuse, mental health problems like depression, anxiety, have trouble maintaining relationships. They often have trouble with relationships.
Mhm.
They have higher rates of incarceration and crime and violence.
Mhm.
They have higher rates of early death, to suicide, or to other means. So that's the worst case. These are the worst case
Mhm.
scenarios,
Mhm.
but we know that children impacted by war struggle much more with their emotional and mental health, and their physical health.
Mhm.
So, looking into the future, you want to try and help them develop their emotional and mental health as much as possible. So that might look you know, like in our schools now, we're finally starting to have what's called social emotional learning in school.
Mhm.
So in
Mhm.
school, it used to just be like, reading, writing, and arithmetic and science. And, that was it. That's all school was for. Now our schools are building in this emotional curriculum to help
Mhm.
children learn about their body and their brain and their emotions and their feelings and how to cope with them and things that they
Mhm.
can do.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
for children, to help them cope with these situations is really probably the most pressing thing right now for families, since the war is going on. And yeah, I can give you some suggestions for that as well. But I want to give you a second to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
catch up
Thank you
on
so much.
everything.
I would like to add that this March I was in Orlando in the conference, and I visited um, uh, some meeting with the teacher who told us how to teach kids to be optimists. And
Mm,
I understand that this is, this is about social and emotional skills as well. And I wish I didn't have this, this kind of like skills in my past when I was like schooler. And it would be like super nice, and it would be good even for adults right now to understand how you can be optimist, what you just need to do to become optimist. So it's, yeah, I guess, it's super important, and it's, very very valuable skills for kids and for adults as well. uh
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I think there's a lot of value in teaching kids how to see, notice the positive things, right? Because there's always going to be a balance of positive and negative in our lives. And we don't want to be, what would you say? There's in our country, like there's a big pushback right now against toxic positivity, which
Mm-hmm.
means like
Mm-hmm.
just always telling kids and adults to like think positive, just change your thoughts and that'll change how you feel. And, just stop thinking that way and everything will be
Mm-hmm.
better, and so I think there is a balance there that has to happen, where we do, and being able to notice the good things that happen are important, but we also don't want to um be this toxic positivity my hair is getting all out of control, toxic positivity person, where we're just always ignoring like the reality, like this is
Mm-hmm.
really hard,
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's giving acknowledgement to like some of this stuff is really really painful and really hard, and being authentic and not just everything's great, everything's fine. I don't know, but like in our country, like that's how we were all raised in a lot of families, where it was just like everybody was just always trying to be happy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's better to teach children that, life isn't about being happy all the time. Life is hard sometimes, and it's going to go up and down. There's going to be happy times for sure, but there's going to be really sad times. There's going to be really painful times in your life. And when we can give them like a more realistic
Mhm.
balance, I think,
Mhm.
of, there's good and there's bad, there's happy and there's sad, there's, you know, sort of a, that being, and I think this is important, is that being happy isn't necessarily the goal, but that being sort of at peace and content is more
Mhm.
of a goal.
Mhm. Mhm.
Happy is more of like a high, right? It's more of an extreme, like it's a
Right.
being
Right.
in joy or happiness is like a high. You can't stay there forever.
Yeah.
But if you can get to a place where most of the time you feel content and like at peace, that's
Mhm.
more realistic
Mhm.
thing. And of course you're gonna go up and down, sometimes be really happy, sometimes be really sad, but like
Mhm.
having the goal be somewhere in the middle is more
Mhm.
realistic.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Agree. Agree. Let me lead us to the next situation. I am living in Dnipro, my city, like 70 kilometers from front line. It's
Mhm.
relatively, sorry, relatively far from front line. So we are living somewhere here, and here is, like front lines around us. But and Our kids, they're learning online, so we don't have offline. We didn't have offline for some period of time. Right now there are like two choices for our kids in the area, whether they can learn from home, or they can go to school if school has shelter, so it's important. And in Kiev, they started. Kiev is the capital of Ukraine, and they started the educational season. Uh, Probably previous one and this one, they are learning offline mostly. And there are some situations that happen in Kiev, for example, in case if there are some alarms or rocket attacks. So teacher just gathers all the class kids, and they're going to shelter. And thanks God we didn't have, any like problems and any like awful situations. But in case if some explosions happen, teacher with many kids in shelter, and they just need to handle somehow the high level of anxiety with kids. Can you give some tips or suggestions how to deal with this case?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, so, the trying to kind of maintain your its composure in those situations, I want to just acknowledge how difficult that is. And um, I can't imagine, how scary that might be. And my heart really goes out to the people in those situations. So, first of all, obviously the number one priority is everybody's safety and making sure, everybody is safe and not harming themselves or each other. Some things we can do to start to kind of calm the nervous system in those moments would be to do some like bodily activities, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when a lot of times when we are feeling threatened or on high alert or feeling very scared, we get all this energy and adrenaline coursing through our bodies. And anything we can do to sort of burn that off, for lack
Mm-hmm.
of a better word. So even like having the kids, do jumping jacks or run in place or get their bodies moving somehow, can be helpful. Doing things like putting their arms around themselves and giving them tight bear squeezes can feel comforting.
Mm-hmm.
Another one I suggest is it's called bilateral stimulation. It's very long,
Mm-hmm.
two very long words. It just means crossing your arms like this over the front of you and tapping on each shoulder
Mm-hmm.
and taking some slow breaths in and
Mm-hmm.
out. That can really help calm down the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And bilateral stimulation can also be done on your knees, like altering knees, or it can be done in lots of different ways. I encourage parents to look into what bilateral stimulation is. It is a part of EMDR therapy, which is a trauma specific therapy that I'm trained in. And so, those are some basic things, but really, getting the body moving, even rocking back and forth, asking
Mhm.
kids to rock back and
Mhm.
forth can be helpful, or twisting side
Mhm.
to side.
Mhm.
Um, helping them get their body moving. Now, another thing, if the children are just frozen in fear and look as though they are just in shock, then you want to do some grounding activities. So a grounding activity is something that will take children out of acute trauma response, and that looks like engaging with the five senses. So you might ask them to, and I always use like, you might say, okay, class, what are five things you can see here in this space?
Mhm.
Let's name five things we can see.
Mhm.
Let's name four things we can hear. Let's
Mhm.
name three things we can touch.
Mhm.
Let's name, why am I forgetting one of the senses? I don't know what it is. But then, like,
Wow,
and
fragrance.
smell, like what's something you can smell and what's something you can taste.
Mhm.
And when we engage the five senses in that way, it helps to settle, it brings you back into the present moment.
Mhm.
And just reminding them, that they are safe now, that it's their job to keep them safe, that we just need to kind of stay in the present moment, that we're working through the plan,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
we're going to do everything we possibly can to keep you
Mhm.
safe.
Mhm. Mhm. And
So those
help
are just
them
some
to
practice things.
yeah, sorry, and
Mhm.
it may help them to switch a little bit attention from what's going on outside to what's going on here, and just to, take some attention to like different stuff.
Exactly. Doing even, I know this might not be possible, but um, doing math activities has been
Mhm.
found to be grounding for children. So, okay, class, let's do some simple math,
Mhm.
stuff
Mhm.
simple, not complicated, but
Mhm.
okay,
Mhm.
what's 7 plus 7? What's, like,
Mhm.
and have them
Mhm.
think. When you get them into more of that thinking brain, it helps to
To
keep them
release
in
it.
the present moment
Mhm.
and takes them out of their fear reaction. And so, yeah, giving them like some simple tasks to do, um, giving them some simple instructions that gets them thinking in their
Mhm.
thinking brains, that can be really,
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
effective.
Cool, cool. Thank you so much. Um, my next question is about refugees. So we touched a little bit this question about refugees. Today I just read the statistic that more than 6 million citizens of Ukraine, they're already out of Ukraine, and they just went to Europe and to other countries in the world. And for sure, kids with parents as well. For adults, being refugee, being in another country when you just need to start from scratch, it's obviously hard situation. And I I may think so. I think that it may cause some problem with kids as well, because actually when you just change your environment from the daily routine, from the daily some tasks and everything, and you are running and moving to the environment in which you've never been, and it's hard. And how to be with so it causes traumas as well, and how to help kids who are refugees in other countries.
Yeah, yeah. Very, very traumatic experience as well for children and adults, to be running for your lives. I mean, anything that makes you feel as though your life is in danger is traumatic.
Mhm.
And so, yes, having to leave your country, leave everything you know behind, is very disturbing and distressful for children and adults. And I think that what what we often miss, or at least we do here a lot of times, is the loss. You're really experiencing an intense amount of loss and
Mhm.
grief. for the
Mhm.
things that have been left behind, especially so suddenly in this case. And so it's really a traumatic grief that children and families are going through, alongside the trauma. And what I've seen helpful to families here anyway, and I know every culture is different, and so I don't know what it's like exactly for Ukrainian families, but for here, what helps is taking part in some grieving of what's been lost, to
Mhm.
acknowledge what's been lost, to point out to the child, this must be really sad for you
Mhm.
to lose so much of what you're used to in your daily routines, and maybe a toy got left behind or that was really special, or your neighborhood or the people you're used to being surrounded by, acknowledging that for them
Mhm.
as a
Mhm.
huge loss instead of just pretending that it didn't happen, because I think that's our instinct a lot, at least as parents. It's like if something painful happens, we don't want to talk about it because we're like,
Mhm.
if we talk about it, we're just going to upset them more. And we don't know what to say, and we don't want to do any more damage than it's already been done. So we kind of just like keep moving forward, put our heads down, and
Mhm.
let's
Mhm.
just talk about this. But I find that that is actually not helpful for children. Children are thinking about it anyway. They are grieving, often silently, without anybody really realizing it. And so it's better to acknowledge it, talk about it, find ways to grieve the things that were lost. Find rituals to incorporate into daily life. So maybe if you're really missing your home and where you're from, maybe every night before bed, you light a candle, you say a prayer, you send a wish up to heaven, or you do something to acknowledge
Mhm.
that person or thing that's missing. And having a place to put the grief is also helpful. So if there's like, um, like some things we do with children is make like a memory garden. Like we make like we like paint rocks, and we put certain things on there that remind us of the person or place, and then we have like a bowl with some like painted rocks in there, and it's like a place for us to kind of put the grief that we can visit. If we can take that out each night and look at it if we want to, but if we don't, we at least know that like our our grief has a place that is
Mhm.
here with us.
Mhm.
So lots of work around the grief and the loss, and really acknowledging that for children instead of pretending that it hasn't happened. And children will, what would you say? Like we tend to think that we can't talk about these topics with children, but they really can handle it if we can handle it,
Right.
and they're only as fearful as we are about it. So like I talk to my child about death, like since she was born, like when things die or if a family member has died, like I tell her, because in our culture we keep death and loss in this sort of category of don't talk about it with children, but they see it, they know what's
Mhm.
happening, they feel
Mhm.
it, they can sense the sadness of adults, they can sense the things that are going on around them. And so pretending that it's not happening or not talking about it just tends to bury the feelings and shame what they're feeling,
Mhm.
and make them feel alone in what they're feeling. And so when they have someone that can talk to them about it and be honest and admit that these things are really sad and hard. And um, art is another great way, processing through what has happened,
Mhm.
using art or storytelling or music,
Mhm.
any sort of artistic expression. So maybe you ask your child to write a story,
Mhm.
about
Mhm. Mhm.
the
Mhm.
hardest part,
Probably
whatever the hardest.
play with them on this
Thing.
topic as well. Mhm.
Yes, play is huge. Play is how children process trauma. So you might see children who are acting out the trauma with their dolls, with their figurines, with their trucks, which, in different ways. And I recommend that as long as the child is safe and
Mhm.
not harming themselves or others, to allow them to play out those scenes. You might not understand what they're doing. You might be frightened even by what they're doing. Um, but as long as they are safe and not harming themselves or others, that's their way of processing what they've been through. So,
Mhm.
giving children the toys and the tools to play out what they've experienced is actually very healing for
Mhm.
trauma, and is another way that we can allow them
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
to process what they've experienced.
And I suppose that with play we can prepare kids to like different kind of situations, and with the help of plays prevent some like traumas, or I'm just speaking right now about war. So we can prepare themselves and give them understanding of how to behave, what to do in the playful manner. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, that would be helpful too.
Yeah.
So are you saying playing out like this is what we're gonna do? Like if this happens,
Mhm.
is that what I just want to be clear that I understand what you meant by that.
Because
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just asking because one of my questions was how to prevent the traumas that may help in war. But I see that one of the ways that we can handle this point is to play with the kids, and in this manner prepare them to what may happen without, being scary, without like some traumatic experience before.
Right, right. Yes. If you can anytime we can prepare, and that's another skill too that will help them heal. But preparing a child for something that might happen that's going to be shocking or scary is always better than just letting the event happen by itself. Of course, we can't always expect what's going to happen, but feeling mentally or emotionally prepared is an important part of preventing the trauma. So if now we don't want to give them too much time to think about it, because then that can create a lot of anxiety. But, if they have just a little bit of an advance notice, like if you are going to be leaving the country, let's say, instead of just whisking them out of bed the next morning and leaving, if you tell them, even the day before or 2 days
Mhm,
before, maybe
mhm,
depending on the age of the child, you want to
mhm,
give a child who's a teenager, you might want to give them a week to kind of process this in their mind that they're leaving. I don't know if you have that kind of flexibility. I'm just
mhm.
giving an example.
Right.
Younger children, you want to only give them like 2 days, a day or so to kind of anticipate what's going to happen. But moving forward after the trauma, one way to help children feel safe and in control is one, to always keep your word when you can. So be trustworthy, keep your word, and always prepare children for changes when you
Mhm,
can. So
mhm,
if say, I mean, even with my own daughter, she didn't have like any type of this type of trauma, but she really needed to know like what her day was going to look like so that she could feel settled in her body. So in the morning I would wake up and I would tell her, and she was like 3 and 4 years old, but I'd
mhm,
say, okay, this morning we're going to have breakfast. Then we're going to get dressed. Then we're going to kind of sports cast and walk through
mhm,
what the day is planned to look like so that they can have some sense of, okay, I know what's coming next. And that helps them feel less anxious and afraid.
mhm, mhm,
And you might need to do that with children for a long time before they start to feel safe again.
mhm,
But
mhm,
yeah, preparing them ahead of time is definitely important. And of course, keeping your word and keeping the routines and structure when you can is also really important, because that's, the shock of the events, and then the lack of control and the lack of safety and not being able to trust what's going to come next is the real trauma of these situations.
okay, yeah, 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 yeah. And one of the my latest questions is how parents can understand when it's time to go and deal with professional psychotherapist.
Yeah.
So what?
Um, the sooner the better. If you
Mhm,
have access and you've been in this situation, I mean, I know it's improbable that everybody would get therapy, but I think any child who's been through these circumstances that we're talking about today needs
mhm,
therapy.
mhm,
And I know that's not realistic, but if you have access and you are able to get your child therapy, the sooner the better.
mhm,
They can never be too young for therapy.
mhm,
And what we see is that they may look fine now, like they may not be exhibiting any symptoms. I find that hard to believe, but you might not notice. Some kids will really keep it inside and you might not notice it. And around adolescence, you'll start to then see the behavior
mhm,
issues. At least
mhm,
that's how it starts to transpire in America. I don't know, I can't speak
mhm,
exactly for this situation, but what we see with children who are in foster care, which is kind of similar in a way to being, suddenly moved and removed from everything and put
Mhm,
somewhere foreign and
mhm,
unusual, not knowing anything and losing so much. Um, those children might seem fine when they're little, 4, 5, 6, but then once they hit adolescence, something shifts, and that's when all the behaviors start coming out, and that's when the real dangers around substance misuse begin to surface. And so adolescence is also a very delicate time. The good news there is that, and with all trauma, the good news is that there's not only adverse childhood experiences, which we talked about earlier, those ACEs,
mhm,
but there's also positive childhood experiences that mitigate the impacts of trauma. So
mhm,
we've also
mhm,
done research on the positive experiences that reduce the long-term outcomes of trauma from the past. And those all circle around relationships and loving people and social support. And so, over the long term, what you really want to be focusing on with yourself and your children is how many supportive people can I get in my life?
mhm,
The
mhm,
more loving, supportive um, individuals involved in your life and your child's life, the better the long-term outcomes for both of you. And so finding support groups, finding a mental health professional that you trust, having friends to surround yourself with, being part of a community, getting involved in community events, even sports for kids can be really helpful, or having some sort of like group hobby, whether it's playing an instrument or, doing something together socially. These are all sort of protective and mitigating factors for trauma.
mhm, mhm,
And we also know that from research by Harvard University that it only takes one caring, consistent, loving adult to help mitigate the impacts of trauma for children. So it doesn't necessarily have to be lots of people, although the more the better. But,
mhm,
as long as they have at least one supportive, caring, loving adult in their lives that sticks by them no matter what they do, loves them
mhm,
unconditionally,
mhm, mhm.
and mitigate the impact. So
Yeah, yeah. So, thank you so much. We are almost used all our time. Probably would like to add, a couple of words at the end of our conversation. And I would say that thank you so much. I learned a lot today. So I just made a little bit research before our interview, but for sure I find out, a lot of things to learn from you. Thank you so much for your time and for all the activities you do, and that you're ready to help.
thank you. Thank you. And I want to say that, I mean, none of this is going to sound probably good enough, right? For what people are going through. I mean, sometimes there is just nothing that some things are just so devastating that you just no words, no tools, no skills, no things feel helpful. But I just want to give the people hope that children, when they are supported and loved and cared for, they can overcome these things.
Mhm,
And I've seen it happen. And as long as they have you and you're taking good care of yourself too, which I know isn't easy, but the adults really need to focus on their own well-being, and not just their child's, because if they aren't strong for their children, if they aren't feeling good and safe and secure in their bodies, and they're not getting their needs met with health, or with eating properly or getting enough sleep and doing all those things, then you end up being short-tempered and irritable with your children, which just makes everything more difficult. So I always want to say that as much as I talk about how to help the children, we really have to be the leaders and find ways to support one another, and find other adults that you can talk to about these things, and get the support that you need from family and friends, and don't be afraid to ask for help
mhm,
when you need it,
mhm.
because everybody needs help sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. Again, thank you so much for our conversation today. It's very useful, and probably that's it for now.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.